Hello Frosties! This patch there are a lot of options when it comes to covenants, talents and legendary choices. The difficult thing for me as a guide maker is that all of these options are viable. Right now, there isn't a clear-cut way which will work for everyone. It's all situational. I will break all of this down in an easy-to-digest way so you are better equipped to decide for yourself which will do more damage in your situation. I will also be clearing up those new rotational questions. Frosties, I have a big announcement for you guys. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, and just like my streams, it's party time. Raid is celebrating their 3rd anniversary and you are invited. These are only some of the amazing things that have happened in the game during those years. The Doom Tower is one of the newer content additions over the years. It introduced a whole new world of new and terrifying bosses to slay. Sprawling over 120 levels, the Doom Tower brought exciting new challenges for seasoned players. As a high-level RPG, Raid started with hundreds of unique characters and bosses. The sheer amount available is staggering and there's no stopping there. Check out some of these sketches. And if adding new characters wasn't enough, last year Raid added a whole new faction. The Shadowkin are a tribe of warriors from the Far East, recently liberated from the reign of evil. But that doesn't mean they're the good guys either, and it certainly doesn't stop them from being one of the coolest factions in the game. And of course, no review can end without addressing the newest and biggest addition to Raid. I'm talking about the Hydra boss. With multiple heads, and each with a different ability, it requires a different strategy each time to destroy. It can be quite discouraging, but on the other hand, this boss gives some of the best artifacts in the game. This month in particular, Raid is celebrating its 3-year anniversary event. They are piling on the free gifts to every player while adding in a bunch of new content and events. Links are provided in the description below. For any new players out there, hit my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen and you'll get a huge birthday package worth $40. You'll get 3 free champions at once, plus 10 Magic, Force and Spirit XP brews. Simply click here to claim your free gifts. And since it's Raid's birthday, the gifts keep coming. All new and existing players can get a bunch of free birthday gifts worth over $25. Once you're in-game after clicking on my links, just enter the promo code 3YearsRaid to get your hands on everything. Code available until the 14th of May. I'll see you in the game. Anyone can make a guide these days, and because of this, it can be super difficult to source credible information. You end up with conflicting information, which is confusing. The sources you can always trust come from the guides linked in the all-time Mage Discord. Toe Grinder's compendiums linked there for all specs should be your go-to. His Mage sims are also the only place to go for reliable, generic sims for trinkets, races, and more. The easiest part about Frost this patch is probably its raiding setup, so let's start there. For Sepulchre of the first ones, the covenant you will take is NecroLord, which, after acquiring double legendaries, is the clear winner on single target. For 100% accurate results, you should sim your soulbinds to see which is an upgrade for your character's unique gear setup. Generically, the soulbind you will want is Marileth. Potency conduits are Icy Propulsion, Gift of the Lich, and Ice Bite. The legendary you will always take is Slick Ice, crafted on Waste with Crit Haste. Unity with Crit Haste can be crafted on Ring for flexibility, the best slot being Helm, or craft it in your worst slot that doesn't interfere with tier. Talents looking like this. Comet Storm is now your best talent for pure single target. This does not rely on tier sets. This is a common misconception. Comet Storm has been best on single target ever since 9.2 dropped because of the change to it no longer consuming stacks of Winter's Chill. Always take Comet Storm for pure single target. For any encounter with more than one target, you can swap to Splitting Ice. Fights like Anduin are almost 50-50 on this talent. This is because it depends where you need your damage to go, mostly on the boss or helping out with adds in the downstairs phase and phase 2. Work out where your raid team needs the damage the most. For rotational changes this patch, I know there is a lot of talk around when to Ice Lance and when to not Ice Lance, so let's clear that up for everyone. When you are playing NecroLord, you do not Ice Lance at 3 or more targets during your Deathborn window. As for Blizzard, you cast it at 6 or more targets during your Deathborn window. Frostmage largely centers around its procs. For detailed proc management, please see the timestamp near the end of the video. To kick Mythic Plus off, let's TLDR the different viable options and the situations you take them. This tier, you mostly play either NecroLord or NightFae in Mythic Plus. Talents will largely stay the same, shown here. There are some optional changes depending on what you're playing and what type of damage you need. I will go through each covenant in detail later on in the video, see the timestamps. NightFae gives you a consistent AoE damage profile, similar to how it played last patch, while slightly conceding single target. It doesn't rely so much on your group, tank, or root, so it's recommended for pugs in the majority of the community. You can play either Freezing Winds or Disciplinary Command. Freezing Winds gives you more priority damage, and because it provides a lot of free procs, it's definitely the easier, more versatile option. Disciplinary Command is a little trickier to play, but it provides more single target damage. It's also a gain in AoE if you are pulling consistent large pulls. NecroLord gives you a really strong 3-minute cooldown. It provides great single target and can be taken in the situations you'd take Venthyr last patch, the more single target dungeons such as Theatre of Pain, or if you're struggling in Tyrannical weeks. The Slick Ice legendary works well in these situations. Now, Necro does offer the largest AoE with the legendary Cold Front. The damage profile is similar to Venthyr Boomy. To get the most out of it, you'd need a group who play around your cooldowns. You ideally don't want to be stuck with one pack to use your 3-minute CDs on. It shines more in very high keys due to the mobs not getting nuked so quickly by the other DPS before you can ramp. Slick Ice offers arguably better AoE compared to Cold Front for the majority of people because it's less punishing if you're pugging and your tank is not pulling around your cooldowns, or the other DPS are nuking the mobs. It's also more damage in the smaller pull counts, which is pretty much every pug route. The most important lesson I can teach you is that we seem to have a bandwagon mentality in WoW, which we do need to move away from. People look at the top rated players and copy their builds thinking this will help them. The answer is that in 90% of the cases, this will not. What's best for the content you are doing will be different to what builds the MDI or top 5 teams are doing. The Cold Front NecroLord build is the best showcase of this. It's a 3-minute strong cooldown with some ramp. Ramping means you need a bit of setup. Your damage builds up and reaches its peak after a while. If the mobs are dying fast, which they will in most keys, looking at you Huntlocks, they will not last long enough to make the most out of your cooldowns. Therefore, it would be more beneficial for you to play something else, such as NightFae, which will give you a front-loaded, on-demand AoE damage profile. Also, in pugs, tanks will be pulling pack by pack and certainly not coordinated big pulls around your cooldowns. For those of you newer to Mage, coming back, or want one way to play, the most generic build I would recommend for pretty much everyone is to play NightFae with Freezing Winds or Disciplinary Command if you're a little more advanced. For those of you who are legendary limited, NecroLord Slick Ice is your raid setup and can work nicely in keys. You can also use Freezing Winds if you have it from last patch. Both NecroLord and NightFae can play this legendary. Do not listen to any guide that talks about stat values or tells you to get certain percentages of stats. Individual stats and stats percentages are an outdated way of thinking about the game. The reality is that the stats for Frost all work off of each other nicely. Intellect being priority, crit and haste being next, then Versa Mastery. Now, despite me saying this, due to the large intellect stat budget on items, item level will be an upgrade most of the time. The only way to tell what gear is an upgrade for your character is to sim. Equip whatever the sim tells you is an upgrade without a single thought on your exact stat values. Frost does have a soft cap of 33.34% crit, which gives you a 100% chance for your shattered spells to crit. It's a soft cap, not a goal. Any stat breakpoints or caps that exist will always be reflected in the sims. This is not something you individually manage. I cannot reiterate this enough. You might even see your sim put you above this soft cap in AoE, as crit still has value in AoE. Either way, again, you do not manage any of this. You sim, equip the gear which makes the number bigger, and that's all. If you would like a very rough guideline for trinkets, please look at Toe Grinder Sims. Though remember, this is a generic list and you should always sim to see what's an upgrade for your character's unique gear setup. After telling you all to sim, let's discuss how to do that. There's no exact way to sim for Mythic Plus. You have to recreate various situations you will find yourself in and use some common sense when comparing the data. First of all, always use patchwork for every sim that you run. Don't get baited into using Dungeon Slice, Hectic Ad Cleave, or Light Movement for any sim that you run, even raid single target sims. The Mage APLs are not built for these. Always use patchwork. The generic sims I tend to run for Mythic Plus is simming a few trash pulls in a row. To do this, you want to select patchwork, up the bosses to around 5, change the length to 2 or 5 minutes, bloodlust off. The reason you don't want to sim a singular trash pack at 20 to 40 seconds is that it can provide less accurate results. The reason being, it will overvalue and undervalue some things. A trinket might sim best in short burst, however you need to bear in mind that you won't have this trinket off cooldown for every trash pack, and over time another trinket may provide more value across an entire dungeon. First up, let's discuss NightFae in detail. NightFae gives you a consistent AoE damage profile. It's extremely pug friendly. It's also useful in AoE weeks, such as Fortified, and consistent AoE tank routes, usually found in the larger AoE dungeons. NightFae also has the best utility in the form of cheat death with Pod Tender, Soul Shape, and cooldown reduction. The two legendaries you can take is Freezing Winds, craft it with crit haste in whichever slot doesn't interfere with your tier pieces, or Disciplinary Command crafted on ring with crit haste. Freezing Winds gives you more priority target damage, and it's a lot easier to get damage from with the free procs it gives you. It's generally recommended. For the more advanced, Disciplinary Command is more single target and also more AoE on the big pulls. Your standard talent setup will look like this. There are 2 rows which are optional. On tier 6, Freezing Rain can be taken if your group is consistently pulling large throughout a dungeon, consistently being the key word. Splitting Ice is taken on the smaller pull counts and for an edge on single target. For most people doing standard pug routes, Splitting Ice will do more damage across the dungeon. You might see some high-end mages take the talent Bone Chilling over Lonely Winter when playing with Disciplinary Command. Before I get into more detail, I just want to state that if you are playing with this legendary, you do not need to play Bone Chilling. This is a common misconception. It is not a build. The choice between Lonely Winter and Bone Chilling depends on what your team and dungeon needs. Bone Chilling sacrifices a lot of single target for more AoE. Usually in pugs and lower keys, you are not pulling big enough to warrant this kind of damage profile. In lower pull counts, Lonely Winter will do more damage. It's not recommended outside of organized teams where your DPS is planned and coordinated. If you have some strong AoE specs in your key, such as Survival Hunters or Warlocks, this mass AoE damage profile can fall off in usefulness because you already have a lot of AoE in the key. In lower keys, the mobs don't have that much health. Having 3 DPS fighting over 1 pack is unreasonable. They won't live long enough. Bosses also naturally take up a lot of time across a key, so overall these being slower can hinder your group more. Lonely Winter is the recommended talent. The soulbind you take is Dreamweaver, potency conduits being Icy Propulsion, Unrelenting Cold, and the third choice being Shivering Cold if your team is consistently pulling large across the dungeon, Ice Bite if the pulls are more standardized and you need an extra edge on single target. As Frost, you are aiming to get everything off cooldown as fast as possible. If playing with the Disciplinary Command legendary, you want to activate it first as a priority. Icy Veins will proc your Frost spell, then the Rune of Power dropped will activate the Arcane spell, so then all you need to do is press Fire Blast, then press everything on cooldown. Try and Frost Nova your Comet Storm tier piece proc to make it shatter. Use your instant cast Blizzards at 2+ targets, cast Blizzard at 3 or more. You can Arcane Explosion as a filler spell at 6+ targets. Shifting Power is pretty much used on cooldown. In AoE, you fully channel it, preferably after you've used your abilities, such as Icy Veins, Orb, Blizzard, and Frost Nova. You never cast the ability on single target, unless you have the Field of Blossoms trait. In this case, you cast Shifting Power for the buff, then immediately cancel the channel. Remember, that's just for single target. Now let's discuss NecroLord in Mythic Plus. NecroLord is very strong on single target, so it shines in more single target dungeons such as Theatre of Pain, and if you're struggling in Tyrannical weeks. Slick Ice doing more damage in the lower pull counts and single target. Coldfront NecroLord plays similarly to Venthyr Boomy and is one of the strongest on AoE out of all the builds, including NightFae. However, it requires a few things in order for it to really shine. It requires the tank to pull mobs around your Deathborn cooldown, meaning they pull super big when you have Deathborn and smaller when you don't. Your tank can also pull in additional large pulls when you're at the peak of your ramp. Speaking of ramp, Coldfront Necro will fall behind if the mobs are dying super quickly. If you have large AoE DPS in your group, the mobs will probably be dead way before you ramp, which can devalue your cooldown. It also falls off in value if your tank is not keeping the mobs grouped up tightly and still. Hopefully, this offers some insight as to why it works well in high-end coordinated groups and not so well in the lower pug keys. What you often find in a pug is they will pull single packs and sometimes doubles, and you have all of your cooldowns and you only pull a mediocre pack. which isn't making the most out of your cooldowns. If I was forced to provide an approximate key level where to play this build, as of this video's release date, I would probably say around the 26 key level and above, basically where mobs can last for your ramp. You can play it in keys lower than this, it all depends on your situation, which hopefully you can decide better for yourself now. The two legendaries you can take as NecroLord are Slick Ice, crafted on waist with crit haste, or Cold Front, crafted with crit haste on back. You could craft it on chest if it doesn't conflict with tier or your other legendaries. Slick Ice is the most damage on single target and higher DPS on the smaller pulls. Cold Front has the highest AoE damage potential, however it requires group coordination to really make it shine. It's generally not recommended outside of very high-end push groups, as it's generally not low-key or pug-friendly. Your standard talent setup will look like this, with some options. On tier 4, seeing as Ice Lance is not pressed during Deathborn in AoE, Frozen Touch can be taken along with Cold Front. It's not recommended outside of coordinated high-end push groups. In your lower pug keys, this build will be extremely underwhelming. It's group reliant to really make it shine and certainly not pug friendly. Train Reaction is recommended. On tier 6, the same rules apply with Freezing Rain as it has the whole expansion. It can be taken over Splitting Ice if your route is consistent AoE. Splitting Ice being a gain in small pull counts and single target. Make sure you sim your character to determine which soulbind is better for your character's gear setup, as the soulbinds can be very close. Marileth performing better in the smaller pull count, the other two performing better in AoE. The potency conduits you want to take are Icy Propulsion, Gift of the Lich, and Unrelenting Cold. As always with Frost, you want to make sure you are pressing everything on cooldown, unless you have coordinated when to use Deathborn with your team. I know there's a lot of talk around when to Ice Lance and when to not Ice Lance, so let's clear it up again. When you are playing NecroLord, you do not Ice Lance at 3 or more targets during your Deathborn window. As for Blizzard, during Deathborn, cast it at 6 or more targets. If you're using the talent Freezing Rain, you use the instant cast Blizzards at 5 or more targets. As for proc management, Brain Freeze procs plays a debuff on the target called Winter's Chill, which means the next 2 spells that hit the target will shatter. Essentially, you get 2 free Ice Lance procs after a Brain Freeze proc. Because of this, you want to use Fingers of Frost procs before a Brain Freeze proc. The exception being if you have both types of procs and are already casting Frostbolt. If you are in this situation, then you carry on the Frostbolt cast into the Flurry proc. This is because cancelling casts is a DPS loss. Also, a Brain Freeze proc is more damage than a Finger of Frost proc. Finishing the Frostbolt cast has a chance to net you a new Brain Freeze proc, and you do not want to miss out on this new one by already having one. In AoE situations, especially with the Freezing Winds legendary, you can quite quickly become overloaded with procs and buttons to press. These days, proc munching is inevitable. Rather than impossibly trying to optimize all of the procs you do get, the priority changes to not missing out on any new procs. Not pressing abilities on cooldown and missing out on new procs is a bigger DPS loss. A common question is when to Frostbolt before Flurry in AoE. The answer is if you have time to cast the Frostbolt and not miss out on new procs. It's more of a DPS loss to miss the new proc rather than perfectly optimizing the ones you do have, which is rarely possible in AoE anyway. So in cases like this, it's more optimal to just let the Flurry fly. Thank you for bearing with me on this video. As always, my priority is to get the most up-to-date and accurate information out there. This patch had a lot of kinks to work out before I felt comfortable releasing a guide. I hope you found it helpful. Feel free to stop by my stream linked in the description. Also, big shout out for Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. I'm a real YouTuber now. Any questions, feel free to comment below or join our Discord. Bye bye!